Hi, it's Chris from Quirky Neighbor, and today I'm going to be looking at three blanket styles from Printify, specifically their hooded blanket options. And it would say each of these three blanket options is quite different from the other. I was actually quite surprised. So this actually came out of a comment somebody left on one of my earlier videos about print-on-demand blankets, asking if I had looked at the hooded styles, and so now I have. And it's typical when I do one of these comparisons, I use the same graphic file on each of the three blankets so that to get a better comparison of what the print results are like. So let's start out with what they call, very generically named, hooded blanket. Okay, so here we are with the hooded blanket. And this is actually this was the original style that they had. They've had this, I think, for the longest time. There's the hood, so of course there's your center back, and then the front, the part that you wrap around yourself. Now, an important caveat, the sample I ordered was the 80-inch by 56-inch. As far as I can tell, this is no longer offered. The only size they're offering now is the 50-inch by 40-inch. Now, I will say that the sample I got, it was only within a half an inch to an inch difference from the stated size on the website, so that's a good sign. Now, in case you're not familiar with Printify, how they work, they're actually kind of a front end for ordering through various vendors. The actual people who do the do your products they're not Printify themselves, they're other companies. So the supplier that you're using through Printify for this particular style is called Arts Ad. It ships from China, and this came in about 14 calendar days from the time I placed my order, and I live on the east coast of the United States. So the construction for this is interesting. So I did I do a lot of sewing, so I was kind of figuring out how they made this, and from what I can tell, they're basically printing a big piece of fabric and then cutting out the shape and doing a seam for the hood. So there's one seam on this. So here is the hood, there's the front of it, the back, goes around the back of your head, top and back of your head. And you can see on the inside, there is a seam. And so what you can tell, if you open up the seam, you can see that there's the printed design. And actually I can see a little bit trace there. They must have pre-printed like where they had to cut it out, a little line there. So that's how it tells you that the fabric was pre-printed before they stitched that seam. And then of course, then they bound the edges, the raw edges, because I will say this is only one layer. With this, it's like a knit binding that goes around the edge to finish it. So pretty straightforward construction and actually pretty effective. And let me just put this on for you. And once again, this is the bigger version that's no longer available. The one that's currently available is about 16 inches shorter and quite a bit less long. So this is very long. Quite a bit left to the bottom and wraps around quite a bit. The one that's currently available is definitely smaller. So as I mentioned, it's a single layer. The fabric is what I would call like a low loft, fairly dense fleece. It's a little stiff. I've seen worse, but fairly dense. And on the thin side, mostly polyester. A little bit of viscose and a little bit of spandex in it. And I would say the surface, it's not rough or anything, but it's not what I would call cozy. It does dry quickly, so I think it's very practical. It did wash and dry quite easily in my apartment size stacked washer dryer. I had no problems getting it washed and dried. And as you can probably see, the color results, the print results, this is actually an original abstract design I did. The colors came out really bright, actually brighter than I expected them to. The detail's really crisp. So this is, I was really excited about the quality of the print itself. Yeah. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to our next style, which is quite a bit different. Okay, the second style we're gonna look at is what they call the hooded Sherpa fleece blanket. It only comes in one size. And the stated size on the website is 70.5 inches on the long side, which is the direction that wraps around you, by 52 inches tall, and that excludes the hood. The hood itself is about 13 inches tall. And I would say, so in terms of length overall, this is by far the largest. So probably a good idea, option if you're somebody who's exceptionally tall or you just want a longer coverage on this. And I will say my sample size was actually slightly longer. My sample size came in at 73 inches by 52 inches, so pretty accurate, and I was pleased with that. So the supplier that you're getting this through on Printify is MWW On Demand. It ships from in the US, and it's fairly heavy. The shipping cost was probably the highest out of all of those no, actually it wasn't the highest, but it was definitely more than the hooded blanket that we just looked at. And it arrived 7 calendar days after I placed the order, which was very good. One thing I did take note of, and I'll put some pictures up, when I got it, it was really compressed down in the packaging. It's a fairly bulky blanket, but they'd really compressed it down. And when I took it out of the package, it was really crumpled and not particularly great presentation, which, something to consider if you're, in terms of like what impression are your customers going to get if you put this on your shop. Now, it did fluff up really nicely, and like the wrinkles went away completely when I washed and dried it, but I wasn't thrilled with the initial impression that I got when I took it out of the package. So the construction of this is very simplistic. It's the most simplistic out of all three of these. So you notice it's basically a blanket, literally, it's just a rectangular blanket that they printed. And then, this is the long side that I'm holding under my chin there. And then they attached this, what is pretty clearly a prefab hood, right to the center of the long side. So the way, and I could tell this because, so here's the seam, here's the hood, and here's the blanket here. So here's where the hood and the blanket are attached. So you can see this is the blanket side, here's the hood side, and you can see very clearly in the seam that the blanket was printed with the design, and then they just stitched this on top. Very simplistic. It's clever, but I will say what's disappointing about it is your hood, you can't change the color of the hood. It's always this off-white. And so it's not necessarily spectacular for if you're looking for like an all-over design option. Now, this is a very cozy style. Let me put this on. And once again, this is by far the longest when you take into account the hood. And the hood is definitely cozy. So, option is 100% polyester. The fabric, they call it Sherpa, but I would consider it more of a faux fur. The pile on the printed side is definitely shorter than what you get on the wrong side. The wrong side doesn't get printed. It's always this kind of soft or off-white. And it is machine wash and dry. As I mentioned, I have kind of a smaller washer dryer setup, and I had to put this through the dryer a couple times to get it dry. But it probably, if you have like a larger, more standard machine, it's gonna dry in one cycle. I had no problems cleaning it, and it is noticeably heavier in weight than the hooded blanket that we previously looked at. So the print result comparison is interesting. The details are still pretty clear. Now, and obviously some of this is because this has a bit more of a pile than either the other two that we're looking at. But but the details are still reasonably crisp, but the colors are noticeably lighter. Like they're really kind of muted and faded out as compared to the other two blankets. So that definitely did disappoint me a bit, but it's something you could certainly take into account when you're doing your designs. Okay, so let's look at our last option. So our last option is what they call the Snuggle Blanket. This one also only comes in one size. The stated size is 80 inches by 55 inches, And that 55 inches includes the length of the hood. This is definitely the shortest of the options that are out that I'm showing you. So mine came in at 78 inches by 53 inches after washing, and the excluding the hood, the blanket part, this part that like, you know, is from like your shoulder to your knees or wherever it hits you, is 39.75 inches. So let me just show you this. Okay. So the supplier you're going to use for this one at Printify is Subliminator. This one is also a style that ships from China, and this one did take about 19 days to get to me from the date I placed my order. So it definitely took the longest by far out of any of these three. So this style is a little different than the others. This is 2-layer construction, and the outside is a very kind of a thin, very kind of silky, fleecy fabric, a little slick and shiny, as you probably saw. And the interior lining, you had two options. So they had one called a micro fleece and the other called what they call the Sherpa lining. And they're basically, in my mind, variations on a faux shearling. I wound up getting the micro fleece, and it's a fairly short pile for the, you know, for the category. When I looked at the product pictures on the Printify's website, the Sherpa style looked like a bit longer, shaggier style, so, and it looked similar to some other blankets I'd purchased in the past. So I decided to try this particular backing. So one interesting construction detail on this one that is a little different than the others is that, so if you go to put this on, you'll find in the upper corners this elastic strap at each corner. So presumably to help hold it in place. A little different than either of the others. It's the only one that has any sort of fastening effort at all. So as I mentioned, the fabric, a little shiny, you know, a little shiny, it's very smooth on the outside. The inside is, you know, in this particular option is the shorter pile faux shearling, 100% polyester, machine washable. Interestingly, on the website, they recommend drip drying, but I will say that's not necessarily the most practical thing unless you have a proper clothesline, which I don't. I put it through the dryer because I know a lot of people will put it through the dryer. In my small machine, it took 2 cycles in the dryer, but it came out fine. Didn't notice any problems. Now, I will say there is one thing I did notice about the construction is it's, as I mentioned before, it's 2 layers inside and out. So they stitched it, you know, they stitched at the seams and then turn it and top stitch it. There's definitely, you know, a little bit sloppy on some of it. I noticed a few minor ripples. So it's like, I was just being very particular with the construction that I was looking at. And the print quality on this, so you can see the details came out great. Definitely brighter than the Sherpa one that we just looked at. So it's kind of, in terms of the color reproduction, it's kind of in between the first one and the second one. So as I say, these 3 are each very different, I think, which I think is great because you have some very clear options to choose from. You can really pick and choose what features matter to you and what you want to offer your customers. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.